Uh, so, Tamer, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I'm excited about the discussion that we're going to have today. I think it's going to be valuable for the students at the university. We're going to talk about cities and technology and future development in cities. But I thought I'd start by asking you just to say a few words about your areas of focus and the work that you're doing now.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to this class. The questions and the issues we are going to discuss are very important and eye-opening to me to listen to questions from your perspective, and they made me think about what we are doing. And it is a pleasure to be talking to you and to your students now or at any time in this regard. My background is a typical engineering background, and my research was typically in construction management. The more we looked at research issues, the more we looked at solutions to the problems in the construction and infrastructure industry, the more we discovered that engineers for the longest time have seen infrastructure as a technical domain. In reality, it is a socio-technical domain. And I'm trying to add the social side of the infrastructure to my research. And this means how to engage community, how to look at the governance system of infrastructure, and how can we transfer infrastructure from just being a service provided to the community to an instrument and a mechanism to enable them to realize their potential.
Thank you. And as I've looked at the research that you do, you've been able to explore this in a number of different areas, which we're going to talk about in the questions that I've got prepared. But our focus, particularly, and your focus, has been on the future of cities. And I thought I would start with an overall question around what you would see as the main differences between what cities are like today and what they might look like in the future, and what you think the main factors are that will influence that development.
Fantastic. I think there are three dimensions to the smart city. The first is the hardware, second is the data, and third is the governance. And so the hardware is the flashy things that we see around us, camera-enabled traffic signals, and Internet of Things, and sensors all over the place around us, and the inevitable driverless cars that are going to be in our city. And I have absolutely no problem or concern about the progress in this regard. There is big players behind this. You talk about Apple and Google, General Motors, and the likes. The technology has had a lot of investment and a lot of success. As a matter of fact, driverless cars are essentially more safer than regular cars. The second is the data. And this is where we have a big problem in this domain. The data is not available and it is scattered, it's not accurate, and has many issues. And this relates again and again to the long neglect that municipalities had for this domain. But it's this data that would allow us to accommodate people's needs, optimize the way we run the city, understand opportunities, share information among the people, and provide them with access to real-time data, insights, and tools. And so this is one of the biggest challenges to a smart city, and we are not there yet. The final element is the governance. How are the city going to be managed? These cities are going to be managed, and who is going to make decisions, and what are the issues? For example, the city of the future is going to be highly influenced by artificial intelligence. Well, what if I, as a citizen, do not subscribe or understand or get the right training in artificial intelligence? Should I be left behind? Would that artificial intelligence be an equity divider in the future? If the private sector is going to have a lot of input and, I guess, control over the city, who's going to govern what they decide to do or not? Let's assume that Google is operating uh, the driverless cars in Toronto. Should the city impose a higher fee on any trip outside the GTA? Because if you allow people to commute from outside the GTA in a very comfortable scenario like this, you are going to increase sprawl. So should the pricing that Google is doing be controlled based on criteria like this? And so it's a big challenge that we are seeing in the future.
Okay, and so you talk about the value that data might provide in engaging citizens and in influencing the design of infrastructure and the operation of cities. Could you talk about how that might work? So, if I'm a citizen in that city where this is happening, what will be going on?
It's a very good question, and we are looking at two fundamental approaches. One that is kind of immediate, and one in the future. The immediate one relates to engagement, and the future one relates to empowerment. And in terms of the engagement, we want to provide citizens with data that can enable them to make the right decision. So there is now a trend called mobility as a service, and this can be seen as an example where we ask the citizen, where do you want to go? What are your preferences? And what are you willing to give or take from the system? So I'm traveling, let's say, within downtown Toronto. The system could accommodate my needs and say, we will arrange for a trip that you use, for example, Go Transit, cycle for a kilometer, walk for half a kilometer, and then take a taxi for the last part. Why? Because I said I like walking and the weather is good today. Cycle for a kilometer because there is a cycling station at this point. And so the system accommodate my profile and offer me the best route that is not just like the shortest or the cheapest, but that matches my need and desires. Now, if I say I'm also flexible, then the system can suggest to me that instead of taking the subway in the rush hour, that I extend my walk to be 20 minutes instead of taking just a 10-minute walk. And in this regard, I, as a citizen, contribute to the positive outcomes of the city. I contribute by not using the subway. And for example, there's a big station in Toronto, Bloor and Yonge. This is crowded and it needs to be expanded unless we streamline the number of people who are going to this station. And so we can do it by spending millions of dollars on expanding the station, or can do it by behavior change. And as we get into from the idea of accommodating your needs and informing you to supporting your behavior change, we empower you to make the decision. We empower you to lead the city in one direction or the other. And more importantly, the next generation is going to be definitely more savvy than us in dealing with the data. And so once you have all these data, you can be empowered to develop a new app that would resolve some of this. And around this app, you build your own business and we spur new industry. We can also give you the data for you to be able to challenge a decision by the city during the environmental assessment process. So instead of just listening to engineers telling you things that you don't understand, we anticipate that the next generation will be able to take all this data, crunch the numbers, work with a colleague in Japan and colleague in France to study this thing and say, you know what, you really do not need to spend $100 million expanding the Bloor-Yonge station. If you do this and this and this, and here is the data that I used, here is the analysis that I used, you'll be able to save things. So if the smart city is not only about the hardware, but it's about the data and the empowerment of people to use this data to realize their benefits, participate in decisions, and realize opportunities in the knowledge economy, then we are successful.
So you're describing an environment where there is a lot of data being gathered through the Internet of Things and other ways, presumably, of gathering data, and that data is widely available. People are able to access it to develop applications of their own, but also to access services that might be provided by the city that would enable them to make decisions about their lives and to be able to live their lives in better ways, I guess, would be an overall way to describe that. What I'm also interested in is what it might mean from the city's point of view. So, for example, at the moment, there are decisions being made about new subways and rapid transit in Toronto. And against the background of COVID-19, but also against the background of technological change. And I can only imagine what it must be like to be a city planner at the moment, having to make these decisions with this degree of uncertainty and a lot of moving parts around, what this city might look like in the future. So, how can technology help them with that?
It's a very good question, and I can tell you a couple things as a background before I start answering this. Since the 1960s, every industry in the United States, and this was a study by the Federal Reserve, has gained enhancement in its productivity. They are able to do more with less, except one industry, which is the construction industry. It is going down in its productivity. And you can imagine, like in 1960, how many hours did it take you to build a house? How many hours does it take you right now, given that you want to apply for a lengthy permitting process, apply and go through a lengthy environmental impact assessment process, sometimes more expensive than the project itself? Watch over safety and health and stuff like that. So the same house right now is being built through longer hours, and as such, our productivity is going down. And so the construction industry and the municipal sector have for a long time, and it is proven, been at I guess, the lower end of adapting technology. And the informed urban planner would suffer a lot because he or she is seeing a lot of opportunities in terms of applying and using data, but he or she does not have the tools to do that, does not have the time to do that. So in my advice to the city is that there should be two fundamental things that needs to be done. The first is invest in people, hire people, compete with the companies that are hiring the bright young men and women who are able to do this. If nothing is going to change without having human resources, train your already existing people on the vast opportunities that they have. Second, change a part of your business model. And you cannot rely on the current existing system. It's very rational, very structured, and you need to get out of it. And this could be seen as a scary thing, like, no, we want the urban planning and the decision to be held within the hands of professionals who are unbiased and stuff like that. And I agree, it makes a lot of sense. But the current business model is quite rigid and needs to be changed. And so these are the two fundamental things. Now, some of the details include you have to collect the data, you have to clean the data, and you have to make the data connected because different data sets do not link to each other. This is quite lengthy investments and time that's going to take place. In terms of the business model, you can resolve many of these by relying on the billions of dollars that has been invested by private companies in this regard. So IBM, for example, and Apple and Google have noted that every sector of our economy is using data more efficiently. And this is still a raw section. There's a lot of money to be made in them. So they are investing tons of money in this. So there must be some investment in realizing these systems and using them. Again, this doesn't mean that we hand over the management of our cities to the private sector, but at the same time, we should not leave it in the current structured, rational way.
So what I understand you to be saying is that technology provides the answer to my question of how we make effective decisions about the future, and that is being able to access data to analyze and understand that, using technology to help us to do it, to make better decisions in the ways that companies are doing that now, and which using tools that companies are developing now.
Yeah, exactly what I just mentioned in the beginning. We have the technology and the people in the municipalities are deprived of it. If you give them the technology, you need to act on the data, because technology without data doesn't make any sense. And the current structure of the business model of governance in the city and decision making has to change. The technology, the data, and the governance are the three pillars of this change.
Okay, and as well as this, you have said that the empowerment that information technology provides should enable communities to create more sustainable environments. So, this empowerment will contribute to more sustainability in city activity.
We hope that this would be the case. And on one side, we should let citizens have the open opportunity to invent, come up with new ideas. But on the other side, we have to build systems and governance models to create consensus. So what you decide is the right solution, and you calculated everything and you managed to develop a plan for your neighborhood, has to be approved somehow, or presented for approval somehow with your neighborhood. And so again, we give the people the tools, the data, but we have to build modern governance structures that would enable that to happen. And this way, we do not stifle innovation, but at the same time, make sure that we are collectively moving toward a more sustainable future. But I'm not assuming that by default, every solution that's coming from the community is going to be sustainable. We have to mix these two. Mind you that what I noted, at least in my kids, that they are being educated and coming out with a complete awareness of the environment and the social issues. It wasn't in my schooling. In my schooling, you needed to get good marks in math and be able to solve equations, and then whatever happened to the environment happens. But the younger generation right now are orientated towards sustainability. So on average, I think they will do a better job than us.
So you, if I hear you properly, you seem to be saying that because most citizens, not sure if that's true, but probably it is, are concerned about the environment, then what we're doing with technology is increasing people's capability to be able to influence the environment to make it more sustainable.
I have that hope. I have that positive attitude, but I'm also aware that it's not going to be 100% of the people. But compare that with my generation. We never heard about something called the environment. At least there are people who are hearing about it. We were not educated about it. People right now are educated. However, there are still people who deny climate change. And so it's not going to be 100%, but at least it's an issue for discussion. There are numbers. In our generation, there was no issue for discussion that relates to this. And so I'm more hopeful for the future than many people would think. I think this next generation is enabled, is aware to make better, more sustainable decisions.
And so, as an example of that, presumably, if we're aware of the impact of our transport behavior, if we can see data on the air quality in downtown streets, if we see information on health, on people who live along those streets where pollution perhaps is higher, that enables us to perhaps design apps which will help people to change their behavior in relation to this. It may just make people change their behavior itself because they may avoid those streets or behave in ways that are less polluting. But basically, that is the type of thing that you are thinking of.
Yes, and there is a side note, maybe that would be helpful to your students, and I learned that from my colleagues in social sciences. I had to talk to them. Is that they surprisingly said that there is almost a consensus that the word behavior change doesn't happen. Behavior is what you innately believe in, and there is very little that changes in your behavior. What we need is to change the practice. And so that can change. Let's say, I don't care about climate change, but the government gave me a discount for buying a more efficient furnace. Even though I don't believe in climate change, I'm going to buy this furnace. And so, what I'm trying to say is, while this thing is a social aspect and is being embedded in the minds of our kids, the ultimate change will happen from policy changes. And you have to be able to put the policy. And so there is the information, there is the awareness, there is the education, but nothing is going to happen without also a change in the policies.
I read in something that I found when I was researching this interview that you were using interactive virtual gaming, or you'd done a project on this, to improve the engagement of citizens in cities. And I found that interesting. I was wondering if you would tell us about that.
No, yes, we are planning to do that. So we have just a small experiment in it, but if we get the funding, we'll implement it. And the idea is, over the years, we found that when we build an infrastructure, let's say a bridge, a road, a water purification system, we have rosy expectations of it. And then as we implement it, we find that there is big problems in it. Like during Eisenhower days, everybody was thinking, oh yeah, you'll have a highway connecting every two cities and there is an exit to almost every house. We found that this is wrong. So we wanted to capture this thing, the life cycle of a project, and in a way that does not tell people what should they do. So this is a new trend in our industry called digital twin. And so you build in the virtual world something that replicates what you have right now. And this replication is not just like the image, but everything, as you mentioned, the number of population around it, the tree canopy in the area, the pollution, the opportunities. And we want people to see this happening in a future, virtually before we build it. And if it's just a game, then that's fine. But what we want also is to capture their interaction. Why are they not agreeing to something? Why are they promoting something? Why are they think that this is going to be good? And hopefully, in the same time, we can impose on them some input. One could say, you know what, this idea of building a transit line here is not going to be good because there was a study that said it's not going to be used. An alternative is this. So we learn from what they are saying, we feed back information to them and say, so what would you do? What decision would you do? We also could impose things that they haven't discussed. So let's say a COVID scenario, and we see how they respond to it. So it's an attempt not only to engage them and inform them, but also to learn from their experience in a way that would allow us to see the future as much as we can.
So you're describing a simulation model that would allow people to create different scenarios and understand the impact that those might have.
Exactly. And we interact with them by analyzing their decisions and speech or comments. And in some cases, we provide additional data. In some cases, we provide challenges to them to see how are they going to be responding to it. So it's not a reactive simulation or just observing people playing games. Our hand is in the game.
Very interesting and seems very valuable. So I also then wanted to consider that what you seem to be describing is that the role of a citizen, the responsibilities perhaps that a citizen has, might change inside a smart city. Now they are more easily able to participate and be empowered as far as the city is concerned. Does this change what it means to be a citizen in a city?
Yes, the big dream is that you are effectively going to be a knowledge entrepreneur. So it's not only an entrepreneur, but a knowledge entrepreneur for some who decide to that. And so the citizen is not just a reactive person who sees a project being built and say, what's that? Or an actively engaged citizen where we would, before we build the bridge, we ask the citizen, what do you want? And the citizen is innovator, and in an active way, they take the initiative to go and innovate a new idea and advocate for it and work on it. And we have seen a lot of this. They call it the citizen active networks or citizen sensor networks. Citizen collect information, put them together on a website, and keep discussing how are we doing in our neighborhood, what is the trend that we are seeing in pollution or water systems and stuff like that. And so we are seeing elements of this happening right now. And so the citizen, not just a reactive information receiver, but a generator, not only of information, but innovative ideas, and taking the initiative, and not just saying, here's an idea, hopefully the city will be able to implement it. No, we want them to act in an entrepreneur way.
Okay, and partly what I'm imagining as you're describing this is that whereas at the moment in my neighborhood there is a subway scheduled or being discussed, they're going through the approvals just now, and I'll go occasionally to a meeting where there'll be a presentation. I might be able to ask questions. You're saying, and I'll have a small amount of influence maybe on what might happen. You're saying in the future, what we might see is a simulation model, a gamification, if you like, where I'll be able to understand a lot more than I would understand today. And I'll also be able to contribute to say, these are my ideas, these are the things that are important to me as far as this model is concerned, perhaps using your gamification. And, this is a very different experience than we have today.
Yes, and there are two elements to this. The first one is that, as you may appreciate, when there is a physical meeting for a new project, it's only people who are at a certain age group that go. And sometimes it's the same 10 people that go to every project, and that is not fair or right. If we transfer this into an online environment, then we will get the people who are actually going to use this subway and pay for it, the younger generation. And second, we spur ideas, we spur new economy, we spur a contribution to Canada into the new companies that can come out of this in the knowledge economy. We are not reactive, we are just incubating the creation of new business opportunities.
So I also wanted to ask you about the Google Waterfront Toronto project, which was abandoned recently. Maybe it'll come back at some point in the future. We don't know. But it's part of the reason that was discussed at the time that it was abandoned as being, why it was abandoned was because of people's concerns about data gathering and use. I was interested in your views on these things. Should citizens be concerned about the increased gathering of data, and how should that be addressed?
So there are one point that I want to mention before I get to answer this question is that when we talk to people about this dreamy scenario of gamification and looking at analytics and allowing people to do business, they say, oh, this is a fantasy. You are sitting in an ivory tower in the university, and then Sidewalk Labs happened. And they brought this and even more. And so it was really a good thing for those of us who are working in this domain. But back to the concerns about data. First of all, the general feeling is that, Sidewalk Labs left because people were objecting to that. I don't think this is the case. I think the people in Toronto were three ways. People who are saying, yeah, go for it. This is already happening anyhow. It's just that it's just coming out into the light. Other people say absolutely not, and other people say, could we think about this? And I think this is the third one is the right one, which is Sidewalk Labs was not a decision to be made. It was a process to envision the future. And we wanted, I at least, wanted the people to get exposed to these issues, generate additional issues, and work on how to solve them. There is no inevitable success or failure. It is a creative process. And this is what makes me sad about Sidewalk Lab leaving. These issues are very fundamental issues. As I mentioned, there is the technology, the data, and the governance. And we have to face them one day. And it's not only going to face them, we have to create our own solutions for them one day. And as you can see, indirectly, as the discussions about Sidewalk Labs evolved, their proposals, our ideas, our information evolved. And this was the right and healthy environment that Sidewalk Labs brought. And so I thought it was an amazing opportunity. And I think there are elements of it that are being implemented right now by other developers at maybe lower appearance or noise level. And I think also some of these are inevitably going to happen and be addressed in the next 10 years or so.
Yes, and I think my own view was that there were many positive possibilities as far as the development with Sidewalk Labs was concerned, and that if there were concerns about privacy, data, and other things, that it should have been possible to resolve those without too much difficulty. But time will tell. They're gone for now, but perhaps it'll come back. I was also interested in the work that you've done around urban projects, so more towards construction, I guess, but the impact of stakeholders in projects. This has been an area that there's been a lot of focus on in recent years, but also continuing weakness as far as projects are concerned, the participation of stakeholders. So I was interested in how you felt information technology could contribute towards this. I know that you've looked at machine learning, possibly artificial intelligence here, but basically the idea that technology can have a stronger role in construction project management.
Yeah, well, this is something that we are seeing all over the world. As I mentioned, construction industry is one of the industries that least use technology, and so there is a gap that everybody can fill. And in terms of data analytics, we have two types of data analytics. The first one, which is the easy one, is data analytics on structured data that you can put in an Excel sheet, and this is very easy to do. But the other one is unstructured data that you do on text or images. This is harder to understand and process. In one example project, which we are finishing out right now, we're working with the Calgary Transit to analyze the social media feed about their system. And so we have the Twitter tweets from their users and the citizens of Calgary, and it's written in text. We are analyzing them to do a variety of things. First, measure the customer satisfaction. We have 8 dimensions to measure the customer satisfaction in. Second, get to know what can we do in an emergency situation in the city of Calgary. Third, which relates to the construction industry, is examining where are the bottlenecks. Where should we build a new project? And what kind of attitude does the community want? Do they want a streetcar or a subway? The big debate that's taking place in Toronto. And finally, run by them some ideas. So instead of your answer to them saying, okay, we got your concern, we are going to look at it, you could eventually present to them with several ideas. Here is one solution, here is the other. How can we do that? When we analyze the content that gives us a peace of the mind of the community. When we analyze the social network, we find that the social network is what is called a small world, meaning that there are influential players, people who are famous and lead the ideas, and people who are followed. When we look at that, we can see how an idea evolves and is generated. We can also find the influential people whom we can possibly engage in a stakeholder meeting and say, let us understand what you find by yourselves and what you hear from others in this regard. Previously, and I don't want to take too much on this, but I think I'll stop here.
Okay, but what you're saying is that you're developing the use of technology to gain greater understanding of what stakeholders might think, and that will influence what you'll do with your construction project. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and you're driving me to the case that I was trying to say. When the city was building, City of Toronto, the LRT in Eglinton, initially they have designed two stations, one of them in Leslie Street. And the station is actually under a park, and it is surrounded by high-rise building. And when the engineers calculated how many people are going to use this station, they said at the rush hour, there's going to be 2,000 people using it, which is very small. And there is no future for increase. It's in the park, surrounded by high rise, so you're not going to build more than that. And so in a revised decision, they said, we will remove these two stations. Some people in the community objected, and the city held meetings with them. And they went also into Twitter. The newspaper wrote about them. And because their voice was high, and I think it was in the election season, the city council just approved the stations, the two stations, and the cost was $80 million. We went back and analyzed the three sources of unstructured data: Twitter, what people were talking about, the documents that the city was sharing with them in community meetings, and news media articles that talked about what is going on. And we found that there was a discrepancy between what people were concerned with and what the city gave them. And one could imagine what would have happened if we talked and answered their questions and understood their concern. Could that have been a better decision? There's another example. I hope I'm not taking too much time, but
That's fine.
about 17 years ago, the city decided, the city of Toronto, decided to build a dedicated lane for the streetcar in St. Clair. So in St. Clair at that time, the streetcar was driven at the level of the surface of the road, so a car could stand before it, waiting to take a left turn. It could be blocked by traffic. And so that was very bad because that delayed the flow. If you build two raised medians around it, so the streetcar can go uninterrupted. And the city made a study and they said, this makes sense. They did an amazing job in designing it. And they did an amazing job in reaching out to the community. But again, it was the same 10 old people who went to the community meeting. And then as the construction started, a very active group of residents formed a committee and said, no, we don't want this. And they sued the city. The project stopped for about 10 months, costing millions of dollars in delays. Eventually, the city managed to build the system. Now, I am critical of municipalities, but I think the city of Toronto did an amazing job in the next project. They had exactly the same problem in King Street. High usage of the streetcar, being interrupted by traffic and cars taking left or something like that. And so they said, instead of making a decision, we will pilot with the community a decision. And so they decided, I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, but they decided to empty King Street during rush hours only for the streetcar. And if you are somebody who needs to do a business somewhere, you're allowed to go for one block. So you enter the street and get out in the other block. And surprisingly, it was a huge success. And people liked it. We analyzed the Twitter feed about this, and it was just like completely positive. And the city eventually transferred the pilot into a permanent program. And you can imagine here the tons of money that was spent on St. Clair versus just $2 million for awareness in King Street, and the result. The King Street is, to an extent, a construction project without a single bucket of concrete. Because the two projects did the exact same thing, but there was a ton of concrete, steel, noise, environmental, social impact in St. Clair. In King, it was that practice change, and it was giving the community a chance to say, here is what we are planning to do. Try it and tell us what are your thoughts about it. And it was indirectly a proof of this idea of if you empower people, things are going to happen. You build the exact same, you get the exact same result without a single bucket of concrete.
Very interesting. I hadn't thought about the contrast between King Street and St. Clair, but clearly, yeah, it's interesting to think about the difference between them, and very interesting. Okay, I've got two further questions. One is, we're living through COVID-19 at the moment. What impact do you think that'll have on the use of technology in cities?
Well, it is an amazing impact, and I hate to say that there is something good that comes out of this pandemic, but it shows that we need to rethink our decisions about a variety of things. One of the strangest things was the extensive belief in high density in cities. It's still an important thing. It's very important for making transit viable, making sustainable things, but we need to do it differently from here on to avoid this exodus that happened from Toronto. So this is a big thing that is happening. Second, it shows the importance of having data about what's going on to manage the flow of traffic, to manage the activities of people. That would have created a better opportunity for all of us to access the same services in a more organized way without these limitations. So the e-society where you are informed that Costco is very busy these times, and at this time you should go and it will be safer for you, or something like that. In terms of re-planning the transit work and systems like that. And finally, it is having a big impact on office spaces, with the fact that we managed to try and live and validate that this idea of working from home, at least for some time, is good. And so I think that will have an impact on the future.
Thank you. And my final question is that the people who are watching this, a lot of them will be students who are going on to new careers, their first careers, their first step into the world of work. And I would like to ask what advice you might have for them.
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I think in a philosophical way, don't be so essentialist, saying that what I learned and what I have gained is absolute true. The professor taught me this and it should be applied. It just makes sense. Look at options, generate these options, listen to people, get expertise from other areas, and consider the future, not just the immediate decision-making process. So this is the most important thing, and I think it's the hallmark of a highly educated person. It's a person who looks at every scenario as a chance to innovate. And it's not just to apply the assignment that you had in the university or repeat the dogma that maybe a professor told you. You are highly educated, you are independent, you have a chance to create a unique solution. So go ahead and create that unique solution. Second, especially for the technical people, they should know that there is a huge social aspect to our work. It is no longer valid to see an engineer sitting in an environmental assessment session, sitting in the background and expecting that people will ask him or her about the cost and stuff like that. People will ask you about the implications of their social life. People will ask you about the impact on their businesses and their livelihood. And so take this advice of taking courses outside the technical domain as valuable, because they will help you a lot in the future. And finally, you should know that no good idea will survive without a valid business model. So you can just have scenarios and rosy ideas. You need to be cognizant of, am I building this idea in a way that it will succeed or not?
All good advice. Many points there. I think valuable for the people who are watching. I ask that question of everyone that I interview, and I think it provides a value to the students. I'm grateful to you for talking to me today, Tamer. It's been a very interesting discussion for me, and I'm sure it's going to be valuable for the students.
I truly appreciate it, and I thank you for the thought-provoking questions and the amazingly detailed and comprehensive review of what I do. I discovered many things about what I do from these questions, and my best wishes to all the students.